Good morning. Good morning. You look good. You look good too. You look especially good. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the 5th biennial USC Annenberg Walter Cronkite Awards for Excellence in Television Political Journalism. We're going to have a great day. It begins here. I want to tell you a little bit about the awards and why we're here, and I'm going to ask whether my sound is good because is it good? You can all hear me? Great. We'll find out if this panel sound is good in a little bit. These awards are administered by the Norman Lear Center. And what is the Norman Lear Center? For those who don't know, the shorthand, and if you say this on Twitter, it's only half a tweet. We got it down to half a tweet. It's studying and shaping the impact of entertainment and media on society. And if you'd like to know more about it, this brochure is at each chair, and I welcome you to take it home and get in touch with us. The Lear Center began in the year 2000. I'm Marty Kaplan. I am the founding director of the Lear Center, and I'm also hold the Norman Lear Chair in Entertainment, Media, and Society. And saying that gives me a great pleasure because the chair and the center were named after Norman Lear for his values, for his career commitments to entertainment and society, his breathtaking generosity to our work, and I have to add for his personal support and friendship. So please join me in welcoming Norman Lear. There are a number of other truly distinguished people here in the room. You know who you are. So why do we have an award for excellence in television political journalism? Well, the reason, focus on the journalism piece, Thomas Jefferson famously put it best, the only security of all is in a free press. We need journalism and journalists for democracy. That's the reason that we're paying attention to this. Why television journalism? Its reach, the size of its audience. Network TV news still assembles the largest public square in America. 23 million people on a given night are watching the network news, which is 7 times the cable audience. Local television, for those of you who may not know this, is the most popular source of news in America. When you ask Americans what is the number one place they turn to for news about politics, public affairs, and government, the answer has been, for as long as any of the polls have tracked this, which is 30, 40 years, and is still true today, local television news. So what we're doing with the Cronkite Award is shining a light on the best practices in local television news and in network news. And what we do is distribute all these best practices to every newsroom and every broadcast journalism classroom in the country, so that all of these submissions, their reels, are already online. And then in the old days, we made videotapes and shipped them out, and then DVDs, and now everything's online. But we make sure that anyone who is trying to learn what best practices can be, and we ensure that someone can't say, oh, we're a tiny market. We can't do that. There are winners from every size market. So in principle, since 2000, these have served as ways to help people understand why and how local television and network coverage of politics can be well done. Our theme today, to quote someone, I can't remember who said it, change has come to America. Changes in journalism, changes in political journalism, in political culture, in the television business, in communication technology, in the economy, maybe even changes in the idea of excellence. How have things changed already in television political journalism? How will they change in days ahead? Will these changes affect democracy? Well, I'd like to introduce to you the people whose answers we want to hear about those questions. And I'm going to ask you, I know it's hard, to hold your applause until I have introduced everybody here, and then you can just let her rip, all right? Brian Bracco is Vice President of Hearst-Argyle News. Hearst-Argyle is a chain of stations. They own 26 stations, and they manage 3 more. Their newscasts reach 5.5 million viewers a day, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. And more? Excellent. Brian's been at Hearst-Argyle since 1987. He was the KMBC news director in Kansas City, and Hearst-Argyle has won this award every time that we've been giving it. They are an amazing chain. Don't applaud. You have a chance. All right. Dan O'Donnell is the news director of WGAL-TV in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is a Hearst-Argyle station and an NBC affiliate. He's been news director there since 2002. They have at this station 8 full-time staff doing political coverage. There are many stations all around the country who have 0 full-time staff or even 0 part-time staff doing political television. An amazing thing. Michael Pearson is the assistant news director of News 8 Austin. That's a cable station. In a few cities around the country, there are cable stations that do 24-hour news locally, not the national networks. It's owned by Time Warner, and this is the 3rd win for News 8 Austin. Michael Cate is a producer at KING-TV in Seattle. That's a BELO station. This is the 3rd win for King TV. They have 100 minutes of political coverage a week during campaign seasons. And since we at the Lear Center measure how much political coverage exists around the country in political seasons, many stations have, in the entirety of their network, of their local coverage from dawn to dusk, something like 1.5 minutes. So imagine the contrast. Andy Soth is senior producer at Wisconsin Public Television. We have a category for local public television. Wisconsin wins it now for the 4th time. He's been at Wisconsin Public Television since '91, and he's also the content editor of WisconsinVote.org since 2000. We'll also be obviously talking about things like the online presence of stations. I always have to say this, Rick Kaplan, not a relative, is the executive producer of CBS Evening News. He has been the president of CNN, the president of MSNBC, the senior vice president of ABC News, where he also produced World News Tonight. He also was at, he produced Walter Cronkite, I learned today. He has won 37 Emmy Awards. Now, next to him is Lisa Koenig. Lisa, did I say that right? Mm-hmm. Koenig, excellent. Lisa is the senior producer of ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos. She has been at ABC for 19 years. She was a producer at Nightline, and she has won 19 Emmys. And I just want to say something about the division of labor here. For those of you not in the entertainment or news business, there is a distinction between what is usually called the suits and the talent. So the suits are here. And I'm going to ask you, before I get to the talent, to please welcome these people. Now, some suits are more suity than others, depending on where they are in the hierarchy of the business, or whether it's business casual on their circadian rhythms. Talent is amazingly not an honorific term. Some people who are talent may have or not have talent. We are very fortunate today to have talented talent. And I'll begin, again, please hold your applause till the end. Begin with George Stephanopoulos, who hosts ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which is a winner in the National Network category. I met George in a political campaign in 1988, a national presidential campaign of somebody who didn't win. He's been at ABC since 1997. He's been at This Week since 2002, and this is his second win in this category. Next to him is Katie Couric, who is the anchor and managing editor of the CBS Evening News. She has won a Special Achievement Award, which we'll be talking about. She started out as, I just want to get the real deep background here, as a general assignment reporter at WTVJ in Miami, then went to WRC in Washington. She went to NBC as a correspondent in '89, starting out as deputy Pentagon correspondent. She was at the Today Show, famously, between 1991 and 2006. And when she went to CBS in 2006, she became the first solo female anchor. David Brancaccio, another old friend, is the host of Now on PBS, which is in the National Network program category. He has been at Now since 2003, first as a co-host with Bill Moyers. Before that, you probably know his voice as the host of Marketplace, which he hosted and was a senior editor, managing editor of between 1993 and 2003. Invisible next to David, because she had an accident barbecuing this weekend, is Maria Hinojosa, whose title is, tell her about that O. Did you hear that O? So let her know. She is a winner today, along with David for Now, senior correspondent at Now. And then sitting next to the invisible Maria Hinojosa is Greg Fox. He's a reporter at WESH-TV in Winter Park, Florida, which is really Orlando, isn't it?
That's right.
Okay. He's a winner for Local News Individual Achievement. That station is a Hearst-Argyle station, an NBC affiliate. This is Greg's second win, and he's been at WESH since 1987, covering politics. Amazing luxury to be able to cover politics since 1988 at the station. One more phantom presence. She missed her plane this morning, but she's on another plane, and she's going to join us as soon as she gets in, and that's Jo Wan. She is a reporter and anchor for KTSF Mandarin News in San Francisco, known as the face of the Bay Area. But we are thrilled to have everyone who is here. Please welcome the talent.
Marty, you forgot to mention that George has won 57 Emmys. And I've won 62.
And by the way, my mother thought I had talent.
It's going to be that kind of a morning. And I'm glad it's going to be that kind of a morning. We're going to talk about a lot of things. I just want to start one place and then see if we can roll some thread out and keep going back and forth. But let me start with a tough thing, okay? Walter Cronkite, for whom this award is named, he accepted the Edward R. Murrow Award on behalf of CBS in 1987. And he said something which I'd like to read and then get your reactions to in the context of change. Here's what he said in 1987. With almost total unanimity, our big corporate owners, infected with the greed that marks the end of the 20th century, stretch constantly for ever-increasing profit, condemning quality to take the hindmost. If the shareholding public were educated to their responsibility in owning this business, which is fundamental to the preservation of democracy, if they did not expect the constantly increasing unconscionable profits now expected from most investments but accepted instead a rational and steady return on their investment in the essential public service of newspapers and broadcast news, we would be saved from compromising journalistic integrity in the mad scramble for ratings and circulation. Does anyone think that's completely untrue? George.
Well, I hate to bite the hand that feeds me. First of all, anybody would take a rational, steady return right now. I think it's a little overstated. I think that, first of all, I can just say from my own experience, in my entire time I've been at ABC for almost 12 years now, I've never gotten any kind of corporate direction in any way. Now, it is true that we're under pressure to make sure people watch what we do. And as David Weston, our boss, says, listen, we're not in the business of writing diaries. We need people to pay attention. We need people to watch. What I've been most encouraged by, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, is how much hunger there is, at least among our audience, for sort of real news about what's going on in their lives. Listen, started out with the election. Going back to 2006, 2007, we could see whenever we talked about the campaign, people would tune in. And even after the election, the concern about the economy, the people feel every single day, I think has made them stick with us in very tough times, and at a time when most broadcast audiences are going down, we're going up. So I don't feel that kind of pressure in the way that he stated it.
Brian.
I would respectfully disagree, and I would tell you that profit is not a bad word, and quite frankly, profit keeps all of us employed on different levels, and we're all up here because of our quality of journalism. So profit and quality of journalism, I don't think are linked together, and quite frankly, I'm proud of what we do every day on a local level and on a national level. We do good work, and it's not bad to make a profit these days, whatever job you're in, whatever industry you're in. Otherwise, you would see more and more people talk to the newspaper industry these days, see what's happening to them.
Dan, do you?
The two aren't mutually exclusive. We devoted a lot of resources to covering the 2008 campaign, but we didn't add resources to do it. It was a decision based on what we felt was a need for our viewers. It was something they wanted us to do. They wanted more than quick soundbite coverage, so we made that decision to shift those people onto that and really do something of substance. So I think responding to what the audience wants from us is good journalism. It's also good business. So,
Rick.
Well, I would just make the point that, and I guess I've said this before in my life, Walter is mostly right. There's a certain need to make a profit because you have to, fan the fire. You have to have the engine going, and there's a certain need to cover the news in a responsible, aggressive way. Generally, in good economies, you can have your engine, your sales department and all of that, bringing in enough revenue, and it doesn't impact the coverage of news. But in times like these, and this is where I think Walter is exactly right, in times like these, when profit margins are so down and revenue is so difficult to come by, it does have an impact on the news, and it has an impact on how many people are employed. I don't know about, I can't speak for other than maybe the networks. The networks had to lay off a lot of key people and draw down on a lot of bureaus, and I don't think that has inhibited us from covering the news because, for one thing, there are many more international partners that you can have now, and technology has allowed us to be able to be far more nimble in the way we cover stories. But there is a point at which the economy can grow dour enough that it has a dramatic impact on what happens in a network news division. And even when all the owners and all the players are incredibly responsive, there is a point when you risk reducing the resources to a point where it will have an impact on what people get to see.
David.
The panel self-selects for people who are practicing best practices. And it's important for us to remind ourselves there are folks in our business out there that don't share these views. My beautiful wife of 23 years, Mary Brancaccio, is here today. She is a very committed public school teacher, but she used to be in broadcast television news in a large market in California, working for a large broadcasting company that will remain nameless. News director gathered the troops in the newsroom for a chat about their mission. Why do we do this? And a wretched cameraman named Al raised his hand, and he said, well, we're the fifth estate. In return for the having the license bestowed upon us, we need to give back to the community, and that kind of argument. And the news director said, what are you, some kind of idiot? We are here to increase shareholder value for the company that owns us, a diversified large company. Mary is now a teacher, partly because of that incident. I work for a nonprofit, and we are currently untainted by any corporate underwriting supporting our show, not for want of trying. So you should process my remarks with the understanding that it's not like we've come up with a business model that works any better. But if that news director lost sight of what it is, why we are placed on this earth to cover the news, imagine what the audience feels. And I know from my speaking and traveling around the country that a lot of our audience doesn't understand the special duties that we owe society in return for for having our broadcast licenses.
Now is on mandatory 1 month furlough, is that right?
We have 2 1-month furloughs this year. Nobody gets paid for July or December. We have wonderful foundations who support us, but those wonderful foundations who've stayed with us all have portfolios that are down. So we're working to fix that.
Yeah, Marty, I think that what Walter said is, he was channeling Edward R. Murrow at another time. I think, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I could say that in French, but I don't remember exactly how it goes. And I think, it's constant. It's a constant calibration and recalibration between the sales side of the business and the news side. As someone who's been in network news for 30 years now, I know that there often is some fat that we can cut. And we do, I think, have to be responsible in the way we cover news. And when we shoot things, we actually air it and utilize it. And, it's one of those nuanced judgment call things that isn't necessarily black or white. But I also think, there are frustrations, I think, for all of us because we care most about the news, and that's our highest priority. When we have to go to a commercial break after a presidential news conference, when we can't cut into lucrative primetime programming, even if it means an additional 2 minutes, that we have to get that national spot in, or that we have to go to a break before Obama's speech at Invesco Field because when else are we going to go to it? So I think this is an age-old battle. And I think that, as Rick said, it does often compromise resources, which at some point you cut too much fat. And the fewer people you have, the less well the job gets done. It's just a fact. And the fewer high-quality people you can attract to the industry. But I think it's probably more pronounced now, as Rick pointed out, in a bad economy. But I think there has always been this push-pull between news divisions and the sales departments and quite frankly the managers who are responsible for the bottom line.
Michael? What I worry about is when I got out of journalism school and I was in newspaper reporting for about 20 years, is that there were 2 newspapers in every city in Texas. That no longer exists. And what I worry about is that there are fewer and fewer editorial voices, and that's one part of it that I think that Walter was talking about. And I think the other part of it that I see more and more of is that spin is replacing quality reporting. That a bulk of the time, and it's a real problem in the cable business where I am, as you guys all know. And I worry about that. I worry about that one of the big cuts that we are making, Katie, is in basic reporting.
That's true.
And that's what we all need to be concerned about as we move forward.
Because there's such a demand for instantaneous news. The attention span has been so truncated that you really don't have time necessarily. I mean, investigative reporters are the first to be cut from newspapers or television stations, and you don't necessarily have the patience, and you don't want to devote the time to long, drawn-out projects that require a lot of legwork and time. And I think that's really true, that's a real danger of decreasing budgets and streamlining staffs.
Let me ask a question of you and of Rick or anyone else who wants to take it that's related to that. Certainly, it's true of local news. The issue is tabloidization of news. The notion that the only way you get to have audiences is to give them celebrity trials and car chases, and that politics is ratings poison, or that the amount of hard news you can show is limited. So, for example, on the CBS Evening News, after the first commercial, is there still plenty of hard news? And is there hard news after the second commercial? Are these issues as you think about how you put the show together?
Rick.
Well,
yeah,
you
go
want
ahead.
to
No,
take
you can go ahead. Go ahead.
The I'm sorry, I was distracted by this. I
hope it's good.
No, I have to pull my mic closer to my mouth. No one has ever had trouble hearing me before.
It says my mic is okay, though.
Cheers.
Your question was?
Has the hard-soft news balance been affected by the need to hold and grab audiences?
I think there was a time, clearly, when, if it bleeds, it leads, and all that kind of stuff that went around that, where you could make a case that, you really have to go for the sexy stuff and Aruba. God, I was at MSNBC then. We had more Aruba than Aruba had. But I don't know that that's the case right now. And Katie and I made a judgment going into this campaign that wasn't the case any longer, that these are serious times that require serious journalism, that viewers are looking for serious reporting, not just enlightened opinions. And that if you look at what's going on, whether it's George's show or Bob Schieffer's show, I got to get a plug in for Bob, or the Evening News's or 60 Minutes, the shows that take a very serious look at what's going on do better and are doing better. And what we chose to do was devote our resources in a dramatic way to politics, because we thought if you're not interested in this political race, then you're probably surfing at Zuma. And we really devoted resources, and more important than that, time, lots of minutes to political coverage and issue coverage in a very serious, grounded way. And for us, it paid off.
It's one of the benefits of the overall shrinking of
I
the
think
audience.
your mic is still
It's
the problem.
It's one of the benefits of the overall
Put
shrinking.
the mic closer to your mouth, George.
or the
You
chair,
get pretty
chair closer to the table. Try that.
I'll try it. I'm right
There.
on top of it. I mean, the overall shrinking of the audience. When Walter Cronkite was doing the news, I don't know what the numbers were exactly.
We
but
had a 40 share, and we never knew what the numbers were because we didn't even know. This is true. We didn't actually, a lot of us know there were Nielsen ratings for the news because we had a 40 share, so why did it matter? So we never, ever, I didn't know what our ratings were till like 15 years after I left the show.
So now we know that if people are coming to us, they want the real news. They have so many other alternatives every single day, whether it's on the net, whether it's on their iPods or however they're getting their news or entertainment. They can go somewhere else, and they know that when they tune in, either I think to the evening news or particularly on Sunday morning, they want the hard stuff.
If that's true at the network level and at some of the local level, why is it not true everywhere? Why is it that when we study local news all around the country, we've got 10,000 stories in our database. We're always, so watch out, everybody. We're always collecting them and analyzing them. Why is it that only a tiny fraction does make this commitment if it's so interesting to audiences? Dan?
Because quality is harder to do. Why do we cover so many fires in local TV news? Because all you have to do is follow the smoke. To do more insightful reporting, it's hard work. You can't just show up and bang it out. You've got to have some knowledge and expertise and some context, and those things take experience, and they take time, and they take work to do that kind of reporting.
So why would a station decide to get audiences the expensive way and not the cheap way?
Because I think in the long run, the quality pays off in the long run. Stunts and some of the more sensational things might be able to move a number for the time being, but I'm not in this for the time being. I'm in this for the long haul. I'm lucky to work at a dominant number one television station, and it's my job to keep it a dominant number one television station. And the way we've done that is by putting the emphasis on quality, not on quick.
And by the way, one of the things we love to do is to point out that stations which are excellent can also be leaders in their markets and not have to do.
And by the way, it can be devastating. In New York, one of the TV stations, which had been a prominent news station locally, decided to do something a little more, friendly, and in their view, and a little more common, and a little easier, and news where the anchor stood by the water cooler and stuff. And their ratings have plummeted to the point where this is a network-owned station, and on some nights they have a 0.1 rating because they lost completely their audience.
The audience has rejected that as a tactic.
Has rejected it, and the only other number I'd give you is the evening news not only have 23 million on a night, but in the course of a week they have around 64 million discrete viewers. 64 million people tune into the evening news for at least one or two of the episodes, if you will.
Lisa, when you were at World News Tonight, how did this play out?
Well, I spent more time at Nightline and at This Week, which are clearly very serious programs. But as you were saying, it takes a lot of resources to make very good quality TV, make very good quality political TV. And I don't see necessarily, as you were talking about earlier in terms of where resources are going, that it necessarily goes to tabloid, but I think one thing that has happened is that the resources have been concentrated into very distinct areas, Washington, New York, Los Angeles, and the rest of the world. When I started, we had bureaus, and we had information reporting coming in from everywhere, and right now there's tremendous interest in politics, and we see it going up all the time, and it allows us to, I think, do really quality work. But in terms of other news, whether it's piracy, whatever, we become more reactive because there's not kind of the eyes around the world that I think there once was because the resources just don't allow for it.
I also think it's such a, it's because of the times we're living in. I think your question, Marty, would have been prescient maybe 6 years ago. But given the fact that this country is involved in 2 wars, the economy is in the toilet, people are really scared about their own personal finances and the security of the country. I think when the times are good, that's when people sometimes gravitate. And I think it's about judgment calls as much as resources in terms of what people want to see and what they're interested in. And that's when CNN may break in for a Paris Hilton story. I remember seeing that several years ago. But I don't see that. I feel like the mood of the country has changed significantly, and the mood of the people who are making the decisions has changed as well.
Think about the summer before September 11th, 2001.
Shark attacks.
Sharks and Chandra Levy. That was every day, all summer long, while an amazing attack was being built up against the United States. And it seemed to it never made sense, but it didn't seem like it was that huge a sacrifice. Things were going okay. The country was doing fine, and this was sort of interesting. But since that day, I think there has been kind of a sea change in the way what the audience is looking for.
I mean, there's still some fluff, obviously, and I would argue that stories like Rihanna and Chris Brown are not completely fluff, that they raise some very, very serious issues for young girls in this country, for young boys in this country, about domestic violence. And I don't think we should be so snobby that we say, oh, that's for the Insider or Entertainment Tonight or the the tabloid entertainment shows or for the National Enquirer. I mean, I think there are at times stories along those lines that shouldn't be ignored either. I think, again, it's all about making judgment calls because I think there is a voracious appetite for that story for whatever reason out there in the public, and that we shouldn't always think we're too high and mighty to address some of those issues.
Greg, you've been a political reporter for 21 years. How has the audience's appetite for this kind of stuff, how has management's appetite ebbed and flowed?
I think that I think the first thing that's important to know is that viewers are smart. They'll turn us on because, for lack of a better word than an advertising phrase, we brand good news. In other words, if we know that we are putting out quality, both political journalism and other journalism, I think people will watch it. Going back to, I think maybe it's important to remember the times as both Katie and George were saying, back in 1987 when Walter Cronkite was concerned, we were still 9 years removed from the internet. That was the same year that Reagan vetoed the Fairness Doctrine because he said, we don't have just a few outlets for information now, we have many. And what's happened now in that transformative time is that we are providing and can provide the same quality, but just in a different fashion, whether it's a tweet on Twitter, whether it's the internet. I teach a class at college, and at the beginning of every semester, I ask all my students, I say, hey, look, how many of you get the newspaper? No hands. But how many of you get news or watch news or get news on the internet? Most hands go up. They are watching. What they want is to get it in a different fashion. And that doesn't have to change the quality in which we report. It just has to change and challenge us to make it a little more appetizing.
So I want to focus right on that point and then open it up because it's a huge point. It's the not the 800-pound gorilla, but it's the 800 megapixel gorilla, the 800 terabyte gorilla in the room. And that's the consequences to what you do, good and bad, of the rise of the internet. And I just want to first focus on just one of them, which is on everybody's mind, and that's the crisis in newspapers. How are you affected by the crisis in newspapers? And when I say that, I don't mean the distribution of dead trees. I mean the failure of the business model in print journalism, the firing of print journalists, the crisis in what print journalists do and give to you. What does this mean to television news?
Let me take that. Seattle, King TV, we lost a newspaper a couple weeks ago, so we lost a contingent of reporters covering the State House in Olympia. Also, previous year, the Seattle Times, the remaining newspaper in Seattle, two of its three State House reporters left early, sort of sensing trouble. We don't have that many media covering local politics, and we don't cover national by and large. Politics is local for us. And so when we think about politics, we think about a small contingent, maybe 15, 20 journalists. And when you lose 4 or 5 in a year of your most seasoned journalists, then the understanding in the community of what's going on, say, in Olympia or what's going on in City Hall is, I can read the papers and I can see, it's just not there anymore. It's tougher for the public to figure out what's going on. So I see a lot of focus on serious issues in the local community, but when it comes to local politics and local government, I see a real reduction in the quality of coverage. And we can talk about 100 minutes, but I take 50 good minutes over 100, a little quality over quantity, and I think we've got a lot of quantity. We've got people blogging about local politics, but what we don't have is those veteran journalists who've been covering for 20 years who, when they write a story, you can read it and go, I get it. You don't get that anymore.
Michael?
I keep hearing the internet being blamed for the demise of newspapers. I don't buy that.
Microphone, please.
I don't buy that. I think that newspapers have been going down the drain for the last 20 years at least.
Economically?
Well, I think what happened is that when you saw less and less competition at the local level, fewer and fewer editorial voices, newspapers were not required to do the reporting necessary to be competitive. And so what I see on most front pages of the Sunday newspaper, for example, are news features. Basically magazine-style pieces that are personality-based or lifestyle-based. And you don't see a lot of hard-hitting reporting about, whether it be a local member of Congress suddenly moving into a $4 million house on a $100,000 or $200,000 a year salary, and all he was before he was a congressman was a school teacher. And you don't see stories like that anymore. And I think newspapers have lost their audience because it's no longer a good product. And so I think it makes it more and more important for us to do the stories that we are doing on the political side, because every time I think of the word politician, I think of Cheshire the cat, because I think these politicians have got to be loving this death of voices out there that are keeping a watch on them. I don't think
that's the way it feels.
No,
if you're in Washington, I mean, just to pick up on that point, and I think it shows the danger if we lose more newspapers. But you talked about a congressman moving to a $4 million house. I'll probably get the figures wrong, but I think it was the San Diego Union Tribune who found out that Duke Cunningham moved into a much more expensive house. But what happened with that story? Actually, the internet is what gave what made it a national story. Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo picked it up and had his team of reporters pounding on that story every single day for 6 months, and that got the attention of a lot of people in Washington and led to investigations, which eventually landed Duke Cunningham in jail. So I think that it both points up the power, the danger of losing the newspapers, but also what the internet can bring to.
Well, yeah, I don't want to be misunderstood. I think we're at a point in journalism that's it's the biggest opportunity since the very invention of television, perhaps the printing press. Not just in how news is delivered, but how we conduct our business. The business model in itself. I predict that you'll see more and more subscriber-based journalism. For example, what I do, people subscribe to News 8 Austin.
You have to have a subscription to the cable.
That's how they get it. And if they switch to satellite away from cable, they no longer get News 8, and they sure do come running back to get News 8. And so that takes the pressure away from me to worry about the bottom line and advertisers. We're just there to retain subscribers.
Katie, you were talking about enterprise journalism and how staff and labor intensive and time intensive it is. So a lot of that is done by print journalism. And as print journalism is in trouble, how does that affect your life?
Well, clearly we rely a lot on print journalism still in many ways to set the agenda for us at times. And it really concerns me because I think that, for me, the newspapers I read, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, I think contain some really fine reporting that's exceedingly well done. Newsweek and Time, as I see them shrink every week, and yet I read the articles and think, gosh, I really understand this issue so much more than I did with the day of piece, if it came to like the housing bailout. Dave Vondrelli, is that how you pronounce Dave's last name? Wrote just a really brilliant piece recently about that, talking about two families who needed a bailout. Then it became so tangible and palpable to me. So I am concerned about it, and it's very interesting. You don't know how they are going to sustain the business model to actually hire good reporters and pay them a salary. Ariana Huffington just started a thing through a foundation where she's going to basically subsidize investigative reporting so they can continue to do this kind of really good work. And I think it's a huge loss. And because I don't know if you can we have the business model where their talents and capabilities can be translated into the internet, and we can actually pay these people a salary. It's almost like musicians where, now they're all on iTunes. How do they sell CDs? I mean, the internet has really transformed so much, including the way we do basic business in this country.
Katie, I'm glad to know that you read the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Yeah.
I now know the newspapers you read.
He's
Marty?
alluding to my Sarah Palin interview. If anybody didn't catch that.
Rick and Lisa and David.
Okay, we always spend a lot of time talking about the convergence and the what will be the next form of television and the rest, but it's almost, when you think about it, it's newspapers that are the most dramatically impacted by the way technology has evolved, because when you get I don't read newspapers for the most part copy. I read online editions of the newspaper because articles are updated, news stories are updated. When I go online at 5:30 in the morning, the newspapers haven't hit the streets yet. Yet the website newspaper that I read of the New York Times is actually updated from the New York Times that's about to be tossed onto the street. And it was inevitable that newspapers were going to be blown out because they're dated pieces of paper. But I think the way I think they're going to reemerge, and I think they're going to be perhaps even stronger than before. In Boston, I think the Boston Globe is about to finally be buried because the New York Times is going to give up on it, which it probably had planned to do when they bought it. And I think what will end up happening is that a group of Boston journalists and an entrepreneur will start a Boston newspaper. Maybe they'll even be able to take the Globe's name back and produce a local Boston Globe, which has contracts that get international news into it. And
Only online, you think?
No. Well, can I tell you, I'm not sure that there is a purpose in having a printed newspaper. I'm not sure that the smartest way to get your papers aren't to get them online. And if you're like me, I do have actually trouble reading on the screens after a while. And so I print it on my printer.
But Rick, how will they pay for that? How will they pay for that?
Well, I think it's
But internet users don't want to pay for their content.
But they have been proven we have proven that they will. There was a time when we said people wouldn't pay for HBO, but it's proven that people will subscribe online for products that they want and need. And I think that newspapers will turn out to be one of those. Will subscribe, I think, but you want the most updated version of it. So I just think this whole business of, it's unfortunate because I love reading the Sunday New York Times, and all those sections. But I think inevitably it's an online situation.
I'm going to get you, Brian, in a second.
That you subscribe to. And I don't think that, and I do think that would be successful. People will subscribe.
Lisa, I saw you.
Well, just picking up what George said earlier and being a bit of a contrarian, there are a lot of great political websites. And when talking about political journalism, I think in some ways it's actually, as the political producers, pushed our product and made it better. There are so many more people out there reporting, and as we synthesize all the information at the end of the week, that it ups our responsibility because there are so many people that are bringing reporting to the table that we have to, one, be on top of. We often include in our show web things that we get straight off the web, and I think in other places it may have a large effect, but I think a lot of times as a political producer, it's actually pushed us to do even better work because there's so much good reporting out there.
David?
Well, I think flying over each of the comments from the panel has been less a focus specifically on what happens when newsprint disappears and more who's going to fund professional journalism. And I get back to my previous point about the public sometimes is a little hazy about what it is reporters do. Who's going to fund being a witness to history? Who's going to fund getting out there and digging through the primary documents? Who's going to get the interviews with the powerful? When I was in Guantanamo, for instance, that took a decent-sized institution, PBS, to get us the clout to get in. It cost money to go. And there were no bloggers underfoot when we were in Guantanamo. It was reporters over there. And do I have any hope that someone can come up with a business model to fund professional journalism? I still have some hope. I was given a Kindle for Christmas. I do pay 75 cents each for lots of different newspapers in the morning on the train. Even though some I already subscribed to the print version, I pay extra. The other thing that at least guides my thoughts in a positive direction when I'm not, drinking to excess because I'm so full of despair about all this, is this. What if someone came to you and said, I'm taking your Google away. How much would you pay to keep it? My number is hundreds of dollars a month, right? There's a lot of money in there. Hundreds of dollars I would pay. My way of thinking, my way of ordering information is so dependent on that. And a piece of that might be able to be harvested for some kind of funding source.
And that's why this AP legal wrangling with Google is so important. Rick, I don't doubt that people would pay for good journalism or good information if they had to. I mean, the problem is now, it just gets reformatted. You can do great work, and someone else literally steals it just by putting their byline over it. And there's no way you can continue to expect people to pay the subscription rate if the minute it comes out on your website or your program, someone else watches it, puts their name over it, adds one sentence on top of it, and it's free. I mean, and I don't know how to get around that.
And that's the whole zeitgeist of the internet, too.
Yeah.
I think that sort of is the MO that has been established, for better or for worse, that this information is free, that people are entitled to it, and that there will be a citizens' revolt if you start taking it away from them.
There's several people who want to get in on this. Brian?
I was going to agree with Rick on the Boston Globe, but Boston Globe is the leader on the internet in terms of Boston.com, and they have superior numbers to any other outlet. But to go to Katie's point, it's free, it's aggregated, and they take aggregation and they move it onto Google and every place else. There's no business model there for it. So I don't know where we still need to...
Well, we all feed into that right now, too, because we want to be ubiquitous. We just want to be everywhere.
Right.
I can't tell you the amount of material that Katie feeds out in the course of a week, that is free. That's all over the web in all kinds of various forms and unique to the web. But at some point, that will have to change, or when you next do this, there'll be like two people at this desk.
How do you get the genie back in the bottle? I mean, it's out. I mean, at this point.
I'm sorry. I just want to get Andy. Did you?
Well, I wanted to ask Rick Kaplan if he could see a subscription model based on CBS News, because we're all talking about newspapers, but once a newspaper's online, you have the opportunity for it to have as much video as a television source or interactivity or ultimately they could become the same thing. A New York Times site could be the same as a CBS News site. Do you see down the road?
It wouldn't have to be a CBS News site or an ABC News site. It could be a CBS site. It might be that you pick up CBS News, maybe you pay a premium for it, or maybe not, but you sign up for the site, at which point you get CSI Miami and all the other CSI things and all the other programs that are on the network and a catalog of all kinds of other material as well, and that draws you into the site. And there's a fee-based arrangement, just like there is for cable television. And when I started at CNN, we would get a check at the beginning of the year for $500 million from the cable operators. That's what we started with, $500 million, and you just had to sell advertising on top of that. And if you look at your cable bill, if you ask for it to be broken down, there's a certain number of cents in every one of those bills that goes off directly to HBO. People will pay for the ability to get all the good programming, the good content that's on there. So building solid content, be it entertainment or news, is a draw that helps push that kind of fee system. But inevitably, it's, hey, this is not a charity, but it is a responsibility to do it well. And so if you want it, you're kind of going to get what you work for, what you pay for, what you support. At some point, that's what goes on.
Greg?
I've had a chance to talk with a number of people in Orlando who formerly worked at the Sentinel, and they are some very good investigative reporters, and they are leaving one by one, either by choice or not their choice. There is nothing that's going to fix that problem in the near future, but really, when I look at news, I think of news as a product as being like an engine. Okay, Honda makes engines, and they put them on lawnmowers, and they put them in cars. And right now, we're seeing, I guess, in the newspaper industry, the lawnmower being replaced. And the only thing that is consistent in both of those areas, whether you print paper or whether you do news and put it online and hope to sell it, is the advertising component to it. That's the gasoline in the engine. You know how you have to mix gas and oil to make it just right so your lawnmower or your car or whatever works? That's the part that's not happening as quickly as newspaper would like. And so while their model is failing on the old form, they haven't gotten that advertising mixture or the fee-based mixture right just yet. It's kind of like a mudslide. You know, on the rainy day, the mud flows a lot faster. Then you have a dry day, it slows down a little more. And then it goes, the next rainy day, it goes a little faster. That's what newspaper is going through from what I can see. It doesn't mean we have to do worse journalism. It doesn't mean quality goes away. It just means we have to find a way to financially support that good journalism as it makes that transition to something that people want.
Katie, I saw a statistic in a Project on Excellence in Journalism story that astonished me. Your interviews with Sarah Palin, more people saw them on YouTube than on CBS. What do you make of that? Where does that take you? And
well,
Rick,
yeah. I don't know where it takes you, because obviously we didn't enjoy any revenues. We didn't get credit for those extra viewers. What I think it was 7 to 8 million people actually watched those interviews online, and the number could be higher. I mean, I think it just speaks to the way people are consuming news and information today. Our newscast runs at 5:30 in many markets, I think here in Los Angeles, and people aren't necessarily home at that hour. And as much as we'd like to direct them to cbsnews.com or get them to DVR our newscast, it's a bit of an outdated model for the way people are getting news and information. And I was thrilled that so many people saw the interview. At the same time, it would have been nice if it had been reflected in the ratings of CBS News. Instead,
it's money in Google's pocket.
I don't have an answer to this. No. I'm literally throwing this out as a question. Why couldn't you come up with a program much like what ASCAP did with songwriters, where if Katie does an interview and it gets passed on, I mean, somehow they figured out a way to, every time a song was played, the writer got something back.
Right. Yeah, like it was
2
pennies.
That was an established radio station. This is just some guy in his, some person in their kitchen.
Well, now they charge internet radio stations, though, for the play of the song, yeah.
It wasn't just that. If you played it they figured out a formula, an algorithm, that if you played it at a birthday party or at a bar mitzvah, somehow, eventually it got back. A tiny, tiny bit.
Yeah, and they do that on iTunes now, too, as well. But again, not enough to really support. I mean, musicians get all their money through tours and other promotional avenues, not through how many people are buying their song on iTunes, right? I mean, it's a problem. It really is.
But it's also more. It's also a good thing in a sense. You may find this hard to believe.
Does Les Moonves know you think that?
Yeah, he does. And he might say the same thing to you. You might find this hard to believe, but there are some people who don't watch Katie when she does the evening news. They might watch a different evening news. I'm told.
That's shocking, Rick.
I'm told. We thought we had everybody, but clearly we don't have everybody. But what this did is it raised the attention that I think it is growing now to almost 14 million people who have seen the Palin interviews in some form on some website somewhere. What that does is it exposes Katie and her talent and her skills and the interview to a broader audience beyond your own evening news. And in the long haul, that pays off. And it's paying off for us slowly but surely in the long haul. So that was our way of reaching out. We couldn't actually, before the internet, think about it. Nobody would have seen the interview if they didn't watch the CBS Evening News or Saturday Night Live, and that would have exposed Katie to far fewer. We'd have had to buy ads, God forbid, that proof of performance ads about watch the way she interviews, but we didn't have to do that because of the internet. So that. All that extra free viewing, for us, that's promotion. In the same way, George, there's tons of clips that you get off this week, every week, with his terrific interviewing. And that exposes his program and his skills to a much broader set of people who would not have, they may choose. I'm told people watch something that everybody doesn't watch this week, just a lot of people. And this reaches out.
And this may be true, though. It reinforces George's regular audience on Sunday morning. But what happens as people continue to gravitate away from television and rely on watching what they want to watch when they want to watch it, which they only can do on the internet? Then I think it raises the question once again. I hope one of you smart guys or gals figures this out, because it is, once again, how are we going to establish a business model that will support, important professional journalists, and not just some guy in his pajamas in the basement who's writing a blog and passing his opinion on as fact. And that to me is a very serious concern.
I think, Rick, your interviews with Palin is like globalpost.com. It's about credibility in the first place. And if you look at the homepage at globalpost.com, that's a former Boston Globe veteran who started it. They are all about selling their credibility as journalists. And I would argue that in my case, and I think in a lot of cases, it's actually the web, our web product, that drives viewers to our main on-air product, not the other way around.
The Grateful Dead allowed people to make recordings of their concerts and trade them so that they would have enough popularity that people would come to the concerts. So brand equity and distribution as a trade-off for direct income. It is a model.
Also, if you want younger viewers or listeners or readers, you have to nurture some of this. I used to obsess about this when I was in public radio. The audience is a little older. Could we do something to make the audience younger, encourage more younger people?
And just to get the numbers on the table, the average audience of the network evening news is 61.3 years.
Ours is 57. I think most of the evening newses are down there, but if you add in cable, like CNN's audience is, I think, 62.
And when you were talking about NPR, where was it that they wanted to bring it younger from?
Well, we were lucky. All Things Considered, which surrounded my old business show, had an average audience at the time of 47, and I managed to bring it down to 44, which was an achievement in itself, but I wanted to do better. They have research, though, that was very persuasive, that showed that there's nothing you can do with public radio to get young people listening. At age 27 or 28, they magically convert around the time they're thinking about having children or getting a mortgage with, and here's the important thing, one prerequisite. Their parents have to have forced them in the car when they were kids to listen to that horrible public radio stuff. They need to know that it existed. That's where the YouTube stuff comes in. As a public broadcaster, once I've served my core audience, I'm delighted that new technology takes it in new directions. And I think as our stuff gets passed around through YouTube, which we actually encourage, and other ways of getting our stuff out and handing it around on video iPods and so forth, that's grooming the audience that will maybe come to us at the point that they grow up. But I think that's the new mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably, every one of the young people in this room are probably going to grow older. And so eventually they come to our demographic.
One of them's real happy here in the front row. He's very happy.
Lead a relatively clean life. Lead a relatively clean life. Stay out of, dangerous situations, and you could make it.
All right. So we've been talking about some aspect of the potential opportunities that the internet provides. Let me mention a couple of other opportunities, and I'll explain to all of you that I know what movie George watched on the plane here. And I know what Katie did last night. And I know where David recently traveled to. And I know all this because I am on their Twitter feeds and I read their blogs. So for those of you here, who is sending stuff out into Twitter? Who is writing blogs? Greg?
I am currently not writing a blog, but I think that's because we've made a concerted effort at WESH to make sure that while I'm covering stories during the day, that I'm actually writing them and sending them back for our website. It used to be that I would write a story, and if it didn't post till 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock when I broadcast it, then by 6:30 or 7, then it was turned around into something on the internet. And we felt that that wasn't good enough. We were tired of looking at the Sentinel online and seeing something that had happened at 10 o'clock in the morning at a court hearing or at 11 o'clock in the morning regarding our commuter rail that we're trying to build in Central Florida. So I am now, and just about all of us, as we're covering stories during the day, I may not be blogging, but I'm making sure that I send something in story form that may actually turn out to be longer than my broadcast report during the day.
And now, how about all of you executives and news directors? Do you require the people who work for you for free to provide the additional service of blogging and updating and Twittering and whatever else?
We don't require blogging or Twittering, but the one thing that the way we're using it is monitoring social networks. It's like the old police scanner, except it's a police scanner for society. It's a police scanner for what's going on with people. Websites like Monitor, Monitor.com, and things that just constantly record and send out every tweet that's going on in the world. You can really find great stories and see things coming long before long before we would get them through traditional sources. So it's really enhanced our journalism. Just keeping an eye on social networking. Yes, exactly.
It's funny. I feel like the Twittering I do or the blogging is sort of the price you pay.
Do you want to tell people the movie, by the way?
It was Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. Great little movie. Is a way to get to have a better sense of what's going on out in the country. And I find just by scanning the replies and scanning when we encourage people to say send in questions for an interview with Tim Geithner or the president or whoever, it helps. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, we'll use a few of them every once in a while, but it more informs me and helps me understand how to get at the heart of a story in a way that will really matter to the people who are watching or listening.
Katie, why do you do it?
Well, I do a variety of sort of internet things. During the convention, we teamed up with Dig and asked them for major questions they wanted to ask some of our political analysts. And so when I did a webcast following our traditional convention coverage, I was able, it does make you feel much more accessible. I want to give people a voice. Some of the questions were really smart. Some of them were really bizarre. And, so that's one of the reasons, because I want to connect. I want interactivity with the people who watch the show. I did webcasts because it was a more relaxed format for me, who's used to being a part of a 3-hour program and being able to do lengthy interviews and take them longer when necessary. And I thought it would be an interesting extension because we don't have a cable universe playground on,
at
that we can participate in at CBS. And cable has its pros and cons for network reporters, just having been in both of those worlds. So, and then I Twitter and blog very selectively, to be honest with you. I don't think anybody gives a rat's ass if I'm about to eat a tuna sandwich. I mean, I don't even care.
Yay.
And I think some of it is so inane and narcissistic and bizarre, I don't quite get it. I don't know why anybody would want to read it, much less why I would want to write it. So, again, I Twitter selectively. I was coming to LA and I was going to American Idol and more importantly, coming here to USC. So I just sort of Twittered about it. And when I was in London, before I interviewed the equivalent of the Secretary of the Treasury, I Twittered that. Part of it is promotional, to try to draw business to the evening news, to kind of get people involved and make it more transparent, let them understand the process a little bit better. And when I was at a lunch at the White House before the joint address to Congress with George and all the anchors of the Sunday shows and the evening newscasts, and by the way, I was the only woman there, which I thought was really pathetic, that I wrote about that because we could talk about that, and it's not something that I would ever have time to devote to on my newscast, but it was great insight, a lot of it from George's great questions to the president. So again, I do it selectively because a lot of times, sometimes I just don't have that many interesting things to say.
I want to defend not the narcissists and the people who will send you off-the-wall tweets, but rather someone else you described a moment ago, which is the pajama-clad, opinionated, basement-dwelling blogger.
that species that's no longer.
Is that where you write your HuffPost postings, my friend?
Exactly. I am that man. And I read a lot of those people, and some of them are amazingly good. Some of them are trolling the internet, doing real research, and holding the press accountable. Yes, they have opinions, but they are backed with links. You can go back to the original sources. It's tough and alarming, and the attitude that comes with it is sometimes off-putting. There's a lot of snark and a lot of bitterness, but there's also a lot of very useful, informative stuff. And because none of these people necessarily are working for a brand name, it doesn't mean that they don't have something as useful to bring to the party as the people with parking spaces on the op-ed pages of our great newspapers.
I totally agree with that, but I think for every one of those well-educated, well-informed bloggers, there is someone who is, spouting vitriol and opinion without portfolio, and is a complete sort of is misleading in his or her assertions, or doesn't have the background to necessarily inform, doesn't have any editors, doesn't have anybody holding their feet to the fire to say, is this factual, is this true, did you second source this, where did you
isn't
get
the
this?
audience in some way that collective editor sending back saying, you don't know what you're talking about, what about this?
I think at times, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not saying, obviously there are a lot of very smart, useful bloggers, but I don't know about you, but I read the comment sections in some of these internet sites, and I'm absolutely appalled by the level of ignorance and hate and the kind of letters that secretaries and newsrooms used to get and throw in the circular file because they were complete lunatics. And now they live on in perpetuity because they have a forum. And I think some of that is really damaging to civil discourse and to sort of, our ability to have a civil conversation about important issues.
Absolutely. And some of that becomes fact then, even though it is not. And it
That's
hasn't
true.
been sourced. And all of a sudden we're running around trying to make sure that
people game the system and inject stuff in it in order to masquerade as information.
Absolutely.
But that's a big part. I consider a big part of my job is, and increasingly every month, every year, is sifting through what's on the internet and acting like an editor for my audience. We get labeled as the mainstream media, and sometimes we choke off stories we probably shouldn't choke off. At the same time, you do learn, what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. The comments are generally, you're anonymous, you get to say whatever you want. But what we have to do is try to go through it and figure out when is one of these bloggers or groups of bloggers onto something that we should be paying attention to. When should we jump on it and give it put a spotlight on it? And when is it just noise that you should ignore? And there are clues out there. I mean, we all get it. After an interview, you'll get 300 emails that, boy, all sound suspiciously alike on one side, or 300 emails that sound suspiciously alike on the other, and you really can ignore that. That it's just been an organized effort by one partisan group to play, to game the ref. And on the other hand, if you go sift through it and you see a unique, interesting voice who's saying something in a way you hadn't heard before, it makes sense to pay attention to it.
And you do see a lot of very thoughtful. I'm also, I don't want to paint everyone with a broad brush, but you do see very insightful, thoughtful, highly intelligent things. Just as I love reading the letters to the editors in major newspapers, because sometimes I think those people make a lot more sense than anything that I've read in the previous days. So I think, again, I don't want to be totally critical, but I think some of the stuff is really a little scary.
You also made a deft shift there, Mr. Kaplan, when you said on the op-ed page of the newspapers, which is a slightly different function, crucial or even more crucial to political discourse, but not exactly the same as journalism. Wonderfully, there's a lot of young people here in this room, and I'm sure you've learned if you're pitching a freelance piece, magazine, or to whomever, the editors want to know if you can write, but they want to know what your standing is to do that piece. Do you have special knowledge? Why should the assignment go to you? Have you done special research, journalistic, that kind of stuff? And that's what's missing with a lot of the online stuff. People with a global platform, with little demonstrable standing to weigh in on some of the stuff. And if there's ways that we can help or some other mechanism can help in being the curator for that information, I think that's probably a useful function.
I want to just add one more piece to this, unless, Rick, you wanted to. Okay, one more piece as we get toward the end of our conversation. And this is an opinion that is on the internet. In this case, it's Jack Schaefer, who writes about media for Slate. And he said something a couple weeks ago, reverberating around, and it's about newspapers, but I think you can expand on what he's talking about to imagine this argument extended to journalism more broadly. Here's what he said. He said, I can imagine citizens acquiring sufficient information to vote or poke their legislators with pitchforks, even if all the newspapers in the country fell into a bottomless recycling bin tomorrow. Coupling newspapering to democracy not only overstates the quality and urgency of most of the work done by newspapers, it inflates the capacity of newspapers to make us better citizens, wiser voters, and more enlightened taxpayers. I hate seeing newspapers reduced to a compulsory cheat sheet for democracy. So it's an extreme case meant to provoke, and I'm going to try to provoke and make it even more extreme and ask that question about journalism and democracy. I started with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. We all say that the media journalism is essential for democracy. Is that a sacred cow that we haven't questioned? Or do you believe that there is, not just in your gut, but in what you experience, empirical evidence, your careers, your lives, do you think that's true and that what Jack Schaefer says about newspapering or what might be said about journalism is not the case?
How does he know? I mean, my understanding of the death of the Post-Intelligencer up in Seattle was more people were reading it. They weren't making any money off it because they were reading it online. I didn't buy a lot of newspapers when I was in college. But kids today are probably reading more newspaper material simply because it's accessible. I mean, I could figure out, I could get a beer for $0.25. So, I just don't know. I mean, he can propose that. He can postulate that.
But extend the argument to media. Say all of your occupation disappeared. We all think that would be a disaster for democracy. In some ways, the media sphere is so polluted now that to find stuff that you would regard as accurate information and opinion which has a basis, it's harder to do. Do you still believe in the religion of journalism making democracy strong?
I think you're right to equate it with a religion, because I think in the end it is a matter of faith. But I think maybe, and I'm just throwing this out there, because maybe our failures, or our relative failures, prove our worth. And if you go to the run-up to the war in Iraq, and I think there was an awful lot of information out there. I don't think anyone could have known that Saddam didn't have any chemical or biological weapons. There was no way you could have known that or believed that. I think there was an awful lot of information out there that the claims about his nuclear program were overblown. And I think it is, while it was reported in various places, I think it's a fair criticism of the mainstream media that we didn't trumpet or spotlight the how dubious those claims were enough. So if you believe that the most consequential thing a government can do is go to war. And if you believe, whatever you believe about that war, if you believe it was a mistake to go to war if there were no weapons of mass destruction, the failure of the press to bring that up enough, I think, proves our worth.
How does he know where the quality of the journalism is? How does he know where the quality of the journalism is from the source he's getting it? In Austin, we were asked, all the television stations got together, the affiliates, and they included us, decided to debate whether we would go to pooling video for what news managers might deem routine stories. We put it to a debate in our newsroom, and proudly, our newsroom overwhelmingly rejected to join the video sharing agreement with the other television stations. So how is he going to know if no one was there at an event talking to a politician, talking to an official, talking to the chief of police or a paramedic? Hard, serious questions for whatever the situation warrants. Instead, it's just I shouldn't say just, a photojournalist there, not necessarily trained in asking hard, tough questions, being trained to ask follow-up questions based on the previous answer. So I think he's way out there. How does he know the source?
Well, I was listening to what George said, and I couldn't agree more. The reality of this is I wake up every morning, and I think most of my colleagues do. I hope they do. And I have the same need to bring to people, the finest journalism that I'm capable of helping bring to people. And I have that belief every day. I, like Norman, would like to see 100% of the country vote. I don't care who they vote for, just vote. Show that you give a damn. I think that the democracy is at its strongest when we are great. We have a long way to come back.
We meaning
the media. Well, one of the reasons that the media had little impact before the second Gulf War was because we didn't do our jobs as well as we could have or should have. We didn't have a lot of credibility in a lot of places. We trusted something that we learned in the 70s to question, but we trusted the government for what it was saying. Why would you wouldn't get up at a State of the Union address and you wouldn't be as sure as you are about this, especially since we know we and this is something maybe the administration should have done. We gave Saddam Hussein weapons of mass destruction, so we certainly had a reason to believe that he had them. So why didn't they make that argument? Look? This really is a calling for all of us, I think. If I can't think of anything else that I would rather do than be a journalist. And I can't think of anything else. I wouldn't tell this to Moonvest, but I'd do it for nothing. But, I just think it's the greatest
Google
job.
Would be glad to hear that.
And if our jobs go away, then there's going to be competition for teaching jobs. But, we go into this. I think we've all gone into this in some ways as a missionary, in a way, as a need to help people and do things. And I don't think any of us went into this because we thought it was a smart business decision. And that's one of the great things that's one of the things I love about spending time with fellow journalists is that we really care about what we do, the good ones. Mm-hmm. We really care about what our product is, and we really care how well we're serving the public. And it bothers us when we're not. And it really is troubling when we drop the ball over some event. But we vowed the next day we're going to get back up and try to write it and make it better. And as we achieve that and make safe a lot of our colleagues who are at some risk for financial reasons, that's kind of working for the democracy, which is what makes. There's no other government that has a First Amendment like ours. We couldn't do our jobs in Britain even, or in Canada, where you're really limited in many areas about what you can report. It's only the United States that has this very special relationship with the media, with the journalists. And I love this, and I'll bet everyone at this table does too. And so I don't know. I don't know what that guy was trying to start. but he barked up the wrong tree.
I think it's an inane question, Marty. I have to be honest with you, because I think even though we're going through a confusing time in terms of, as we've said, the business model, a real transitional period, I also think that the qualities that we try to achieve and the things that we try to do every day are still, that were important to the founding fathers are still really important to us. And that's the search for truth, speaking truth to power, quality, accuracy, credibility, all those very basic fundamentals of journalism, I think, are still exceedingly important to a democracy. How are people going to get accurate information if they don't? And we're imperfect. One of the reasons I think we fell down in the build-up to the Gulf War, there were a variety of reasons, including a White House that manipulated the press like there was no tomorrow. But also, we're American citizens as well, and I think there was a certain amount of paralyzing fear that enveloped our profession as well. We were citizens and we were afraid, and we had those sort of primal emotions that I think were pretty prevalent in the society in general. But just because we're imperfect doesn't mean our goals are imperfect. And I think it's a ridiculous question. I have to be honest with you.
Let me ask.
I'm the Simon Cowell of this.
I'm going to ask. Well, that was my question. What were you doing last night? For those who don't know.
Oh, I was at American Idol because I was coming out here, and I watched the show. Huh?
That's disgusting.
Rick was like, "Oh, you can't go to American Idol. What? Don't be photographed there." And I'm like, "What? 22 million people watch it. What is wrong with you? If I could get a few of them to watch me." And of course, he was right in there cheering away, screaming, "You go, girl!" Asking for baseball hats and American Idol T-shirts.
Tune in this fall for our reality show, The Bickersons.
But anyway, that's what I was doing.
I have a couple of things I want to do. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to thank our panel, but before I do that, hold your applause for a second, because I want to introduce to you Joe Wan from KTSF San Francisco, who managed to make it. And then, if you would stand and please thank all of our winners.
Hey, Marty, can I just point out, when I watched the CBS Evening News last night, I believe they said you were on assignment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they used to tell me Walter Cronkite's sailboat was called Assignment. I think that's an urban legend, but I always thought it was really funny. Walter's on assignment tonight.
They actually were supposed to say Katie is off. Today they're supposed to say she was on assignment.
Okay. So what you're all going to do is to go downstairs, and the way to get there is out this door, down the large stairs, and there is iced tea and a chance to mingle and chat. And at noon, for those of you who are able to stay, we have our lunch. The panel is meant not to do that immediately, because we have some picture taking to do, and people will be happy to escort you to where those pictures are going to occur. And let me just once again thank all of you for being here, and all of you for being here.
Thank you.